Some locate the roots of community organizing in sources as ancient as the Exodus story, which is certainly where I first heard about it, or a version of it, growing up as a rabbi's son in California. Some locate the origins of community organizing in Athens, in democratic practice and the principles of self-governance that have shaped our traditions. And some locate community organizing in sources like popular sources of organization, like the labor movement, or like what we've seen in Cairo recently, of popular associations of people coming together. In the US, a lot of the idea of the significance of community organizing is linked with the work of Alexis de Tocqueville, who came here as a French aristocrat in the 1830s, concerned about individualism, and who wrote in his Democracy in America book that knowledge of how to combine, he wrote, is the mother of all forms of knowledge. On it depends all others in a democracy. He was writing about the rich culture of civic associationism that he found here at that time, significant to him for three reasons. First, he was concerned about individualism and thought that associationism could draw individuals out of narrow parochial self-interest into a broader understanding of common interest. Secondly, because the democratic project required the combining of equal voices in order to balance unequal resources. And thirdly, because these were voluntary associations, they could be crucibles for renewal of the values that were motivating the whole democratic project to begin with. My own introduction to organizing, community organizing, came in the 1960s when I left Harvard to volunteer with the civil rights movement in Mississippi in 1964 and 65, which is where I really learned how, as we were taught by Dr. Martin Luther King, how people with bus fare could turn that bus fare into a source of power that could turn the bus system and really, in many ways, the whole system of segregation around. Individual bus fare was nothing but an individual resource when it was used that way. But when people combined it in the Montgomery bus boycott and withdrew their bus fare from the bus company, all of a sudden the power dynamics shifted. And the community discovered itself to be more powerful than the bus company, which is a fundamental insight in how community organizing works. It's about the combination of individual capacity. And it reminds us that democracy is not simply about the protection of individual liberties, but about the creation of collective capacity on behalf of common interests and common concerns. After 2 years in the civil rights movement in the South, I worked 16 years with the farm workers, organizing migrant farm workers in California, where we learned very similar lessons about how to translate resources into power through combination. Then another 10 years of union issue and electoral organizing before coming back to school, as was mentioned, after a 28-year leave of absence to finish my undergraduate degree and graduate class of 64-92 at Harvard. Since then, doing teaching, research, and practice work, I've found I've been privileged to be able to reflect on the lessons of these years of experience with social science in a conversation with a rising generation. In fact, every time I go to class, it's a little bit like having a conversation with the future. And that has assured my own learning into the present. Now, what I want to do then is just take in the remaining time a few minutes to summarize some principles or ideas about community organizing that may be useful. Community organizing is based on an idea of leadership, not as a position or a trait, but leadership as a practice. Leadership as something that people exercise both from formal positions of authority and informal positions and positions of no authority. What does the practice consist of? Well, it consists of taking responsibility for enabling others to achieve purpose under conditions of uncertainty. So the initial act of leadership is acceptance of responsibility. Second, it's about enabling others. It's not a diva model of leadership in which one illuminates the universe with their brilliance, but rather one engages with other people in purposeful social action. And thirdly, purpose, that it's purposeful. And finally, that it's under conditions of uncertainty. Leadership comes to play when things break, when there's contradictions, when there's adaptation required, when things don't fit. So essentially, leadership is a kind of creative or adaptive capacity. And it poses three kinds of challenges dealing with uncertainty. The first is a challenge to the hands. Do I have the skills appropriate? The second is a challenge to the head. Can I conceptualize how to turn my resources into the capacity I need to meet this challenge? And thirdly, it's a challenge to the heart. Can I find the courage, the hopefulness, the imagination, the empathy with others to be able to confront this challenge constructively? And so dealing with those three dimensions of challenge and uncertainty is core at our understanding of leadership and how it works. Now, specifically when it comes to organizing, leadership's understood as developing the leadership of others, number one. In other words, leadership development, but in a very real way, developing the leadership of others, building community around that leadership, and building power from the resources of that community. The notion of constituency is central in community organizing. In other words, people are viewed not as clients dependent on efficiently provided services by a patron or a bureaucracy. People are viewed not as customers, utility maximizing actors who make economic choices in a marketplace provided by entrepreneurs or businesses, but people as citizens, as constituents. The origin of the word constituent from the Latin constare, which means to stand together. A community standing together, who commit their resources, who therefore are able to make choices about what they do through collective action. And so the core idea here is transforming clients and customers into citizens. Community organizing works according to what Stephen Jay Gould called the rhythm of change. He wrote a book called Time's Arrow, in which he said there's two ways to think about time. Time is a cycle, which is the rhythm of continuity, and we get used to that in organizations and bureaucracies and so forth. But then he says time is an arrow, which is a rhythm of change, that it's finite, focused, intense, and that rhythm of change, it turns out, is how we organize ourselves to make change through organizing, and it takes the form of what we call a campaign. Now, most people think of election campaigns, but a campaign is simply an effort that is focused on a clear outcome at a particular point in time, and that assumes that the resources that will be needed to accomplish that outcome in the end don't exist at the beginning. And so the whole effort is to build the resources needed in the course of doing the activity that will be needed, sort of the build the road by walking idea, through a series of peaks, of peak threshold efforts. Each of one then can stand on the prior effort to get to the next point. It's a different way of organizing time and effort that can be very challenging. And finally, this cascaded form of leadership in which we work at developing leadership chains rather than relying on one single point of influence. I think I'm just going to conclude now with an observation about how significant your challenge is. Walter Brueggemann is a Protestant theologian who wrote a book called The Prophetic Imagination. And in The Prophetic Imagination, he describes transformational vision or prophetic vision as occurring at the intersection of two things. Criticality, that is a clear eye of the world on the world's pain, of its suffering, of its limitations. And hope, a sense of the world's possibilities and joys and potential. Brueggemann says it's the intersection of criticality and hope that encourages transformational vision. Healers, which is what you're all about, healers confront the world's pain daily and have to be sources of hope daily. And hopefully that kind of energy, that kind of transformational energy can take you in the direction you need to go.